Welcome back to the Deep Dive, where we take a single complex text and, well, we turn it inside out.
We do.
Today, we're undertaking a deep dive into one of the shortest, yet most, I think, vivid and just enigmatic prophecies in all of Scripture, Isaiah chapter 18.
It really is a contained masterpiece. It's only 7 verses long in the King James Version, but it manages to compress this staggering amount of geopolitical anxiety, prophetic insight, and just breathtaking divine imagery.
It really does. It opens on this dramatic warning to a distant land, a mysterious place crisscrossed by rivers, and they're sending these frantic, swift ambassadors in these fragile little boats made of reeds.
And that's the core tension, isn't it? The entire chapter hangs on the contrast between the frantic speed of these human messengers and the sovereign, deliberate stillness of God.
Exactly. So our mission today is pretty extensive. We need to unpack this oracle concerning Cush, or Ethiopia as it's often translated. And that means dissecting some really complex Hebrew metaphors, tracing the prophecy's surprising historical fulfillment and its future fulfillment. And most importantly, I think, pulling out the spiritual lessons that speak directly to our world today. A world that is, let's be honest, obsessed with speed and immediate solutions.
It's a perfect case study in prophetic writing. And to really appreciate it, you have to get the immediate context. I mean, you have to put yourself back in that time.
Okay, so set the stage for us.
Well, Isaiah's writing during this incredibly tumultuous period, the 8th and 7th centuries BCE. The world's superpower, the Assyrian Empire, isn't just a threat on the horizon. They are an existential conquering machine. They're just rolling over nation after nation.
And Judah's caught right in the middle.
Pinned. They're trapped between this northern monster, Assyria, and this very powerful African kingdom of Cush to the south.
And the sources show that Cush, which at the time had established the 25th dynasty and was ruling Egypt, was fiercely powerful. And they were actively trying to build a coalition, right? They didn't want to face Assyria alone.
Exactly right. So they're sending out these urgent diplomatic missions. These are the swift messengers of the prophecy. They're going up the Nile Valley. They're trying to forge alliances with smaller nations, including Judah.
So this prophecy lands right in the middle of a massive foreign policy debate in Jerusalem.
It's a divine commentary on that very debate. The question on everyone's mind is, should we trust in the strength of this powerful African alliance, in the speed of their diplomacy? Or should we stand still and rely entirely on God, on divine sovereignty, which operates on a very, very different clock?
So right from the first verse, the stage is set. It's this stark contrast between the frantic political maneuvering of man, symbolized by those quick, flimsy boats,
and the quiet, absolute, unshakable control of the Lord.
Okay, so let's start unpacking it. Verse 1. Woe to the land shadowing with wings, which is beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Now, when I read woe in the King James, I immediately brace for disaster.
Everyone does. It sounds like a curse is coming.
But the nuance in the original Hebrew tells a bit of a different story, doesn't it?
It really does. The Hebrew word is hoi. And while it certainly can signify judgment, and often does here, particularly because of what follows, many scholars argue it's functioning more as an urgent, attention-getting summons.
So less of a you're doomed and more of
an urgent, oh, look over there, pay attention to this.
Yeah.
It's a way of grabbing the listener by the shoulders and pointing them toward this distant place. It's a universal call to notice what God is about to do concerning this specific nation.
And that specific nation, Ethiopia, that needs a precise definition here. We're not talking about modern Ethiopia exactly. We're talking about Cush.
Correct. We are talking about Cush, which corresponds roughly to ancient Nubia. So think modern-day Sudan and the Ethiopian highlands. The key geographical identifier is the phrase beyond the rivers.
The rivers of Ethiopia.
Which would be the immense Nile river system. You've got the White Nile, the Blue Nile, all its tributaries, and crucially, the numerous cataracts that divide and shape that whole landscape. So for a reader in Judah, that phrase immediately signals a distant, exotic, and truly formidable kingdom.
Okay, so that brings us to the chapter's first major, highly poetic enigma, this imagery of shadowing with wings. The Hebrew is silsal kanafayim, and our sources give at least 3 really compelling but competing interpretations.
And we can't just gloss over them because the entire feeling of the verse changes depending on which one you accept.
So let's weigh them. What's the first one?
The first is the military interpretation. This is probably the most straightforward. The wings could represent the sheer reach and the menacing shadow of the Cushite military forces.
Like the wings of an army spread out.
Exactly. The idea of a mighty protector or a mighty invading force whose sheer size casts a shadow over the whole region. And this fits their historical role as the powerful 25th dynasty. They were a major military player.
Okay, that makes sense. But then you have a completely different take, the geographical or ecological interpretation.
This one is fascinating. It ties the phrase directly to the environment of the Nile Valley itself. Missionaries and historians of that region have long noted that this phrase could refer to the land teeming with insects or birds. Yes, the word siltsel can imply a clicking or a whirring, buzzing noise. Some suggest it refers to the sound made by massive swarms of locusts, or maybe even the notorious tsetse flies, whose presence dictates all movement and life in that region.
Wow, so their wings would literally cast shadows and influence all human activity.
Potentially, yes. It's a very vivid, on-the-ground image of what that land was like.
But I have to say, the third one, the naval interpretation, that's the one that seems to set the most beautiful visual scene, and it links directly into verse 2.
I agree. I think this one has the most going for it in the immediate context. This interpretation suggests the wings are a metaphor for the shadows cast by the multitude of sails on the many swift ships moving up and down the Nile.
Ah, winged sailboats.
Yes. In that intense Egyptian sun, a large triangular sail would cast a very prominent, very recognizable shadow on the water. So if Cush is sending out flotillas of these vessels, these sailing wings would literally overshadow the river. And it just sets up the next verse perfectly.
It really does.
Yeah.
So, having identified this land and its unique characteristic, verse 2 immediately shows us the human strategy and desperation in action. They are sending ambassadors by the sea, which we know here means the massive Nile River.
This just confirms that urgent diplomatic mission is underway. They are desperately trying to build that coalition against the Assyrian behemoth. The Cushites are trying to leverage their power and their speed by rushing these envoys to foreign capitals. And that urgency is really emphasized by the mode of transport.
The prophet is so meticulous with his detail. Vessels of bulrushes. The Hebrew is gomeh, right? Why is this detail about papyrus boats so significant? I mean, why even mention the fragility of the craft?
Well, the gomeh vessels were light, they were incredibly swift, and they were highly characteristic of Egyptian and Cushite river travel. They were made by bundling thick papyrus reeds together, waterproofing them with pitch. They were perfectly suited for navigating the Nile and its cataracts.
But they're not exactly durable.
No. Compared to a proper Mediterranean trading vessel or a warship, they are flimsy. Their inclusion here is symbolically so powerful. It underscores the exotic, distant origin of the messengers, but also, critically, it hints at the fragility and the vulnerability of the human alliance they're trying to build.
They're literally racing against time in boats made of reeds, trying to stop an Iron Age war machine.
That's the image. A powerful narrative contrast is being built.
So Isaiah then seems to issue a command, "Go, ye swift messengers." And the question that has always puzzled commentators is, to whom are they being sent? The description that follows is just so loaded. To a nation scattered and peeled, a people terrible from their beginning hitherto, a nation meted out and trodden down, whose land the rivers have spoiled. I mean, that's a highly charged description.
It is, and the interpretation divides dramatically. Let's call it option 1. This is the idea that the ambassadors are being sent to Israel or Judah.
So Judah is the scattered and peeled nation.
In that view, yes. The Assyrians have already plundered and dispersed them. They are the ones trodden down by enemy incursions, their lands spoiled by invading armies or the constant demands for tribute. So the Cushites are looking for an ally among the oppressed.
Okay, I can see that. But then there's option 2, which suggests the description is not of Judah at all.
Right. Option 2 suggests the Cushites are actually describing themselves, perhaps as a kind of credential or a warning to Judah.
How does that work?
Well, historically, it's very strong. The phrase scattered and peeled can refer to the distinctive physical appearance of the Cushites. They were known for being very tall in stature, so scattered or stretched out, and for the custom of ritual shaving, which would give them peeled or smooth skin. This was often noted by outsiders like the Greeks.
And what about a people terrible from their beginning?
That fits them perfectly. They were historically terrible, meaning feared for their military might. But at the same time, they're also trodden down by the necessity of constant military engagement and the political instability of the region. They were a powerful but beleaguered people.
That makes the prophecy incredibly complex. But regardless of who the scattered nation refers to, the scene is being set up to show this intense spiritual interaction between human frenzy and divine calm.
Absolutely. The whole frantic diplomatic show, the urgency, the speed, the flimsy technology, it's all just background noise to the Lord. Cush is focused on immediate political survival, seeking safety in human connections. But Isaiah is showing Judah that this whole effort, no matter how swift or how powerful the nation behind it, is operating completely outside of God's timetable.
It's highlighting the vanity of these human attempts to secure peace or safety through political means alone, especially when you're facing what is ultimately a divine judgment.
Or divine intervention, yes.
So this contrast between this localized political maneuvering and this huge cosmic control that leads us directly into verse 3. We jump from the banks of the Nile to a global summons. It just encompasses the entire world.
The scope just explodes, doesn't it? It expands dramatically from this regional concern to a universal decree. Isaiah calls out, "All ye inhabitants of the world and dwellers on the earth, see ye, when he lifteth up an ensign on the mountains, and when he bloweth the trumpet, hear ye."
The parallelism there is so intentional. Everyone on the planet, regardless of who you are or where you are, is commanded to see and to hear God's signal.
It's a total shift in perspective. The world is busy watching the little reed boats, and God says, "Stop, everyone, look up at the mountains."
So what are these divine signals? They're described as visible and audible to all, which suggests something far, far greater than any earthly military maneuver.
Oh, absolutely. These are the ultimate signals of divine intervention and mobilization. The ensign, the Hebrew is nes, was a high-raised standard, a banner, visible from a great distance, used to signal an army to rally or to declare a decisive action.
And God raises it on the mountains.
The highest ground. So it becomes universally visible. It's a signal that the Lord of hosts himself is now acting in human history.
And that image of the ensign carries immense typological weight later in Isaiah's own writing, doesn't it?
It's a huge theme for him. It connects immediately to the prophetic idea of the Messiah as the ensign to the nations in Isaiah 11.10, the one who will draw all peoples to himself. So the ensign is ultimately Christ.
And the trumpet, the shofar.
That sound was unmistakable in ancient Israel. It was used for war, for festivals, for signaling the very presence of God. So eschatologically, thinking about the end times, it always signals the final, definitive intervention of God. The return of Christ, the gathering of the redeemed. God is essentially telling the entire earth, ignore the noise of the reed boats, look for my ultimate sign.
And having issued this universal call to attention, verse 4 gives this profound theological explanation for why God hasn't seemed to intervene yet. This verse reveals what you called God's sovereign quietness.
Yes. For so the Lord said unto me, I will take my rest, and I will consider in my dwelling place.
This feels like the theological core of the entire chapter.
I think it is. The Hebrew word for rest here is shakot, and this is crucial. It does not mean divine inactivity or laziness or indifference. It means sovereign composure, tranquility. It means being utterly undisturbed.
So while Judah is panicking on the ground and the Cushite ambassadors are frantically rowing their boats,
God remains perfectly composed and unperturbed in his dwelling place, in heaven. His quietness should be interpreted as absolute confidence and control, not apathy.
he is considering that the Hebrew is nabat. What does that imply?
It implies careful, attentive surveying. He's watching everything that's happening. He's viewing the entire scene, the rise of Assyria, the panic of Judah, the rush of the Cushites, with perfect clarity and perfect patience. This declaration is a direct counter to the human impulse to panic and rush into flimsy, temporary solutions.
He's assuring his people that even the greatest geopolitical crisis is under his comprehensive, quiet control.
Yes. And he explains this patient, purposeful observation using two really remarkable intertwined agricultural metaphors. They describe his timing.
The first one is like a clear heat upon herbs. The Hebrew is sakquates.
To get this, you have to picture the ancient Near East during the summer harvest. It's that intense, cloudless, relentless heat from the sun.
It can feel brutal.
It is brutal, but it's absolutely necessary for ripening the grain to maturity. It's constant, it's inescapable, and sometimes it feels punishing. This metaphor represents God's constant, inescapable scrutiny, that unrelenting pressure that works his divine purposes toward judgment or maturity. His eye is always on the situation, allowing the heat to do its work.
I mean, if God's presence was only that clear, burning heat, wouldn't everything just shrivel and die?
Exactly, which is why the second metaphor is so perfect. It balances it perfectly, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest.
This is such a paradoxical image.
It is. It's the sustaining mist or the heavy dew. In the dry, hot harvest season, rain is rare, but the heavy dew that forms overnight and lingers into the early morning is vital. It's life-giving moisture. It preserves and refreshes the crops, especially the newly harvested grapes or the gathered stalks, and it prevents them from completely drying out.
So this image represents God's providential care, his gentle, unseen provision that keeps things alive.
It's the sustaining grace that operates even when the intense heat of pressure or threat is upon us. It's a dual presence.
That is genuinely insightful. So God's patience isn't inaction at all. It's a dual action. You have the necessary heat of scrutiny working toward maturity, but it's balanced by the preserving dew of his grace.
The theological anchor, then, is incredibly strong. God's timing is agricultural. You cannot rush a harvest. You have to wait for full maturity. And his apparent quietness is actually a very productive kind of supervision, making sure that the fruit, whether it's the evil schemes of Syria or the faith of Judah, reaches its appointed conclusion.
So we have to trust both the uncomfortable heat and the unexpected dew of his presence.
That's the call.
And trusting that timing is essential, because verse 5 describes the sudden, decisive point of intervention. God acts as the divine vine dresser, but the timing of his pruning is the key.
Yes. For the harvest, when the bud is perfect and the sour grape is ripening in the flower.
For the harvest, before it's too late.
This precision is everything. It means God intervenes before the enemy's plans can reach their full destructive fruition. The Cushite alliance, it has potential. The Assyrian invasion, it has momentum. But God steps in before they are allowed to achieve maximum damage.
Let's focus on the botanical terms here because they communicate so much. The sour grape is ripening in the flower.
Okay, so the bozer is the sour, hard, green grape. It's inedible. The word gamel means it is maturing. It's in the process. And the flower, the niza, refers to the blossom that remains on the vine after the petals fall off and the fruit has set.
So it's a very specific moment in the life of the grape.
It is. It marks the specific moment when the grape is irrevocably set on its path to becoming a grape. But it's still hard and sour and useless. God intervenes at the point of decision, when the trajectory toward destruction is clear, but before the evil has fully ripened into a devastating harvest.
Which tells us so much about God's patience, but also his mercy. He doesn't wait for the Assyrians to destroy everything they touch.
No, he doesn't. And the divine action is swift and surgical. He shall both cut off the sprigs with pruning hooks and take away and cut down the branches.
So he comes with these pruning hooks, the masmarot.
Yes, these specialized curved knives used for severe cutting. And notice the two actions. He cuts off the tender sprigs, the initial efforts, the new schemes, and also the more substantial branches. The established military structures, the whole framework of the alliance.
The theological significance of this is profound. This is preemptive judgment.
That's exactly what it is. God halts the evil plot at its most potent phase, demonstrating not only his foreknowledge, but also a protective mercy toward his own people. He spares them the full fury of the Assyrian machine.
And the aftermath of defeat described in verse 6 is just. It's total and it's graphic. The judgment is absolute. They shall be left together unto the fowls of the mountains and to the beasts of the earth.
This is a deliberate return to the language of curse. Leaving the unburied dead as carrion for scavengers is classic covenant curse language. It's the ultimate disgrace and a signal of utter divine rejection in the ancient world. You see it in Deuteronomy 28, for instance.
So the defeated enemies, these cut-down plans, are utterly forsaken by man and just exposed to the elements.
And what drives home the completeness of this judgment is the duration. It's not just for a day or a week. The fowls shall summer upon them, and all the beasts of the earth shall winter upon them.
A full year.
An entire annual cycle of seasons. The corpses aren't just abandoned momentarily. They remain as a prolonged, gruesome witness to God's justice. It underscores the totality and the permanence of the divine intervention. The defeat is total.
It's like the cosmic order itself, represented by the scavenging birds and beasts, aligns itself to acknowledge and bear witness to God's judgment against human pride.
That's a great way to put it. And this detail connects immediately and dramatically to the historical fulfillment of 701 BCE.
Right. This is where the prophecy leads from metaphor to brutal historical reality.
It does. The ripening sour grape was the Assyrian army, led by Sennacherib. They had devastated Judah, they had surrounded Jerusalem, and they were poised to destroy it. Pharaoh Taharka of Cush was marching north to help, but he was too late to matter.
And God intervened alone.
In a single night. The angel of the Lord, as Isaiah 37 tells us, destroyed 185,000 Assyrian troops outside the city walls. Sennacherib retreated in disgrace, the sheer number of unburied corpses, destroyed by a completely unseen force fulfilled, verse 6, with terrifying and absolute accuracy.
God cut off the attack before the harvest of Jerusalem's destruction could ripen.
Precisely.
So the story then takes this truly dramatic turn. It moves from the carnage and judgment of verse 6 to the stunning hope of verse 7. The opening phrase, "in that time," the Hebrew ahi, it signals a massive shift to a specific future moment of divine appointment.
It's the pivot of the entire chapter. The judgment was preemptive, it was total, but it wasn't the end goal. The verse declares, "In that time shall the present be brought unto the Lord of hosts, to the place of the name of the Lord of hosts, the Mount Zion."
And this present, the share, this is a voluntary gift, right? A tribute, an offering that acknowledges sovereignty.
It's not forced tribute, it's willing worship. And critically, this tribute is brought by the very same people who were the subject of the warning and the judgment in the beginning.
The text repeats the description. A people scattered and peeled. A people terrible from their beginning hitherto.
That repetition is absolutely essential. It means the judgment, the pruning, the disruption of the human alliances, it all served a higher spiritual purpose. It humbled the formidable and distant Cushites, and it demonstrated to them the true source of power.
So the goal of God's action, both against the Assyrian machine and in warning the Cushite alliance seekers, was worldwide recognition and worship centered in Jerusalem on Mount Zion. Okay, so this means we really need to spend some time tracing this thread of Ethiopia, or Cush, across Scripture, because Cush consistently acts as a kind of prophetic representative for something larger.
They're not just a historical footnote. Geographically, it's one of the earliest named places in the Bible. The land is associated with the Gihon River, one of the rivers flowing out of Eden in Genesis 2, and Cush himself is a descendant of Ham in Genesis 10.
And historically, they were a major political and military power.
A huge one. We see Zerah, the Cushite, leading a massive army, 1,000,000 men, against Judah in 2 Chronicles 14. And we see Pharaoh Tirhakah, a Cushite king, directly challenging the Assyrians in 2 Kings 19. So when God chooses Cush as the symbol of submission, he is choosing a fierce, distant, powerful entity to demonstrate that all earthly power must eventually bend the knee.
And their eventual turning toward God becomes a major theological significance throughout the Psalms and the prophetic books.
It's a consistent theme that foreshadows the inclusion of the Gentiles into the people of God. Psalm 68.31 is the famous declaration so often cited in relation to this. "Princes shall come out of Egypt. Ethiopia shall soon stretch out her hands unto God."
It's a beautiful image.
It is. And Zephaniah 3.9 almost perfectly mirrors Isaiah 18.7. It says, "From beyond the rivers of Ethiopia my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring mine offering." So Cush consistently stands for the uttermost parts of the earth being drawn into the worship of Yahweh.
Okay, then the most powerful typological New Testament fulfillment of this vision has to be the story of the Ethiopian eunuch's conversion in Acts chapter 8.
That narrative is the perfect spiritual echo of Isaiah 18. It's almost a one-for-one fulfillment in principle. Here you have a high official, a treasurer for the Queen of the Cushites, Candace. He's already made the long, arduous journey to Jerusalem, to Zion, to worship he is already seeking.
And he's reading Isaiah when Philip finds him.
He is. He receives the gospel through Philip, he gets baptized, and he takes that message of Christ's sovereignty back home. He establishes one of the earliest Christian communities in the world. He is the first fruits of the Gentiles, fulfilling that promise of distant nations bringing their spiritual present, their allegiance, their worship to the spiritual Zion, which is the church.
So when we look at the prophetic statements here and their fulfillment trajectories, we're realizing this single short prophecy operates on at least 3 distinct levels of completion.
That's right. First, you have the near-term historical fulfillment. That is undeniably the miraculous defeat of Sennacherib in 701 BC. God proved he was the only reliable ally for Judah, stopping the destruction before the sour grape could ripen.
And that event also led directly to the political collapse and the eventual subjugation of the 25th Cushite dynasty, which confirmed the judgment on their frantic alliances.
Correct. Then you have the ongoing long-term fulfillment, which has been happening throughout the church age.
And this is the theological fulfillment.
Yes. It's the global expansion of the gospel. Every nation, symbolized by that Ethiopian eunuch, bringing the spiritual tribute of worship and devotion and allegiance to Christ, who is the ultimate ensign raised for the entire world to see.
And finally, the chapter still retains this distinctly eschatological fulfillment that many believe is yet to be fully realized.
Absolutely. The ultimate gathering of all nations to Zion under the sovereignty of the Messianic kingdom is the final horizon. That's where all human political and military power submits to the Lord, just as described in Isaiah 2. And our source material reminds us that Cush, or Ethiopia, continues to figure in later prophecies. It's mentioned in the end-time geopolitical visions of Daniel 11, listed among those who will face the power of the final Antichrist figure.
So the role of this powerful symbolic nation in world history is not yet complete.
It seems not.
It's clear that Isaiah 18 is far more than just a historical record of ancient geopolitical maneuvering. It really feels like it pulls back the curtain on the unseen spiritual interactions that govern historical outcomes.
And this brings us right back to God's quietness. That divine sovereignty and providence is revealed through that composed, quiet-looking, the Cushite in verse 4.
It signifies that God maintains this constant, active, hidden governance over historical events.
Yes. We see the noise, we see the human alliances, the rushing messengers, the threats of empires. But God sees the long-term process of maturation, the heat and the dew, that is leading precisely to his planned outcome.
And the concept of judgment as purification is so vital here, tied directly to that pruning metaphor in verse 5.
The divine pruning reflects a hidden spiritual purpose behind disruption and chaos. Judgment is not merely random or spiteful punishment, it's a purification process. God cuts away the wicked or the unfruitful schemes in order to humble nations, forcing them to rely on him. And ultimately, it prepares them for that covenantal recognition we see in verse 7.
So the cutting is severe, but its intention is ultimately redemptive.
It can be, yes.
I also found that image of cosmic alignment in verse 6 profoundly memorable. The fowls and the beasts feeding on the slain.
It evokes this idea that when human pride reaches its zenith and God finally intervenes with judgment, the created order itself realigns. Nature becomes a witness to the defeat of arrogance. The natural world bears witness to the moral order being reimposed by the Lord. It reminds us that when God acts, the entire universe, from the soil to the scavengers, acknowledges his justice.
Okay, let's turn this ancient oracle into a contemporary lens. How does Isaiah 18 speak to our modern day and our modern lifestyles?
I think it speaks most powerfully to our techno-confidence and haste. We are the beneficiaries and maybe the victims of these swift messengers and vessels of bulrushes. We no longer rely on papyrus boats. We rely on 5G networks, on AI-driven geopolitics, instant digital diplomacy, algorithmic trading.
Speed is everything.
It's everything. We pride ourselves on speed and ingenuity, our modern wings of global flight and digital connection. Isaiah 18 warns us that misplaced confidence in human speed, no matter how advanced, will ultimately be pruned or cut down. The rush to find the quick fix, the perfect alliance, the immediate financial hedge, it's vanity compared to God's patient timing.
And the universal nature of the call, all ye inhabitants of the world, is just infinitely more relevant now because of globalization and universal witness.
It's incredible to think about. When Isaiah wrote this, only a tiny fraction of the world could possibly have seen a signal raised on a mountain near Zion. Today, God's actions in any remote part of the world, whether it's in geopolitics or an environmental crisis or a spiritual revival, they have instant global significance. The call to see the ensign and hear the trumpet is now fully mediated by global news and technology.
So the potential for a universal witness inherent in the prophecy is now a reality.
It really is.
For believers, then, the chapter serves as a sharp warning against worldly alliances.
This is a constant spiritual battle, isn't it? Where do we place our ultimate trust when we're facing modern threats? Threats to our job security, our national stability, our personal health.
Right. Do we rely on the political wings of our preferred government, the economic winds of a volatile stock market, or do we stand still and wait for God's signal?
The text cautions that these worldly systems, our careers, our financial plans, our political parties, all of them will be pruned or cut down according to God's patient agricultural timing. Trusting the speed of the reed boat is a profound and timeless mistake.
I also found the phrase, whose land the rivers have spoiled, carries an interesting, if maybe indirect, environmental note in our context.
It does. It reminds us of the fragility of the environment, whether it's through natural inundations like the Nile floods or through human mismanagement and climate degradation. The land itself is vulnerable to being spoiled or divided. Isaiah's pattern judgment leading to future tribute and worship challenges us to recognize God's sovereignty even in the midst of environmental chaos and to see his hand in the control and preservation of our resources.
So to finish our deep dive, let's just elaborate on how this chapter provides some really targeted pastoral application for believers in Christ. First, there's this profound encouragement that comes from God's timing.
This is the antidote to modern anxiety. It reassures us that the Lord of hosts reigns over all nations, and his timing is perfect and it's productive. We do not need to mimic the frantic rush of the Cushite ambassadors in their flimsy boats. We are called to trust God's sovereign rest, that shakot from verse 4. His patience isn't idleness, it's the deliberate process of ripening the harvest, and we can find our rest within his timeline.
Second, there's a crucial teaching moment here about discernment.
This chapter is a masterclass in prophetic discernment. Believers are instructed to look past the overwhelming noise of worldly politics, the constant updates from the modern swift messengers, the 24-hour news cycle, the social media frenzy, and instead to seek God's clear signal, the ensign and trumpet.
So we're taught to focus on God's clear revelation in Scripture and the steady hand of his providence, rather than panicking over every fleeting threat or human alliance.
That's the heart of it.
Third, there is that serious warning about pride and judgment that stems from the pruning metaphor.
And this is a warning against spiritual complacency, or what you might call pre-harvest pride. God can intervene at the moment of our highest potential, when our career or our project or our church plan is ripening in the flower, and he can cut it right down if it's rooted in self-reliance or worldly ambition or opposition to his will.
Just as he pruned the immense Assyrian army at the height of its power, he can cut away promising plans that are tainted by spiritual sourness.
It's a sobering thought.
And fourth, there's the ultimate help that comes from that final vision of tribute to Zion. It's about mission and humility.
It really is. The ending provides a mandate for global mission and a call for profound cultural humility. When the Cushites, the feared, dark-skinned, distant people, bring their present to Zion, it challenges us to welcome the gifts and the worship of all nations, regardless of their past or their cultural differences. It affirms that the goal of God's redemptive work is a unified, multi-ethnic community bringing honor to the Lord, transforming enemies into willing worshipers.
We have certainly taken a deep dive into these 7 intense verses of Isaiah chapter 18. We've moved from a specific geopolitical crisis involving Cush and Assyria through a spectacular demonstration of God's patient agricultural timing,
all the way to the ultimate universal outcome of worldwide worship on Mount Zion.
It is a profound demonstration of what's sometimes called prophetic telescoping, isn't it?
Yeah.
Where a near-term event like the Assyrian defeat
becomes a type for the church age, with the inclusion of the Gentiles, and then for the Messianic kingdom, with the final submission of all nations. And the recurring role of Ethiopia across Scripture just confirms its symbolic weight. It truly represents the distant Gentile world finally submitting to God's ensign.
And as we conclude this discussion, let's just circle back to that subtle but powerful piece of historical and traditional lore. Our sources mention the long-standing tradition that the Ark of the Covenant itself might have been transferred to Ethiopia before Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem. It connects that ensign raised on the mountain and the ultimate present directly to this deep, unseen history of worship.
Which leads to a final thought. If the prophecy speaks of a distant nation eventually bringing a present, a voluntary tribute to God on Mount Zion, what is the present that you personally are being called to bring to the Lord of hosts today? Is it the tribute of your time, your obedience, your gifts, your allegiance?
And how does recognizing God's perfect agricultural timing, knowing he is sovereignly overseeing both the heat and the dew, how does that change when you choose to bring it?
Do you rush frantic in your own reed boat, or do you wait for his quiet, unmistakable signal?
A challenging and an excellent question for us all to consider. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.